Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're talking about an album I know you all love, the Beatles' Revolver.
It's a classic.
Definitely a classic, but we're going deeper than just surface level on this one. We're going beyond just a bunch of great songs and really trying to understand what makes Revolver stand out,
Hmm.
even among such an incredible discography.
Definitely.
We've got some great sources lined up today, too. Excerpts from articles on louder.com and Wikipedia will really help us get into it.
Awesome. I'm excited. Revolver's so interesting because it's more than just great music. It's like a little time capsule. It captures a really unique moment, not just for the Beatles, but for the entire world back in 1966.
Okay, so paint us a picture here. What was going on back then that made 1966 so important?
Well, picture London in 1966. It was this hub of energy and excitement. That's actually where the whole swing in London thing came from. Fashion, art, music, it was all exploding. And the Beatles, they were right at the forefront of it all. Plus, they were fresh off the success of Rubber Soul, an album that really pushed the envelope for what pop music could be.
Oh, absolutely. Rubber Soul was huge. But you know what I find really fascinating about this shift to Revolver? It's the Beatles themselves. That 3-month break they took before recording, that wasn't just them taking a vacation. It was this period of enormous growth, and you can really hear it in their music.
Totally. And they didn't just sit around during that break either. They were exploring Eastern philosophy, diving deep into avant-garde art, and really embracing the counterculture movement that was bubbling up. They were changing as people, and all of that fed directly into Revolver.
Exactly. They were changing. It's like when any of us try something new. After we've learned or grown, we want to try new things and push our own boundaries. And that's what the Beatles did in the studio.
Yeah, they really started thinking of the recording studio as an instrument itself. Not just a place to play their songs, but as a place to experiment and create something totally new. That's where the real magic happened.
And with Revolver, they got really experimental. They weren't limited by needing to recreate these songs live on stage, which gave them this freedom to experiment like never before.
Oh, yeah. An experiment they did. They pioneered all of these techniques that were revolutionary for the time, like automatic double tracking ADT.
ADT, that was actually invented during the Revolver sessions, right?
Yeah, an engineer at EMI named Ken Townsend came up with it. He wanted to simplify double tracking vocals, which was this really tedious process that John Lennon especially absolutely hated. Imagine singing every single line twice just to get a fuller sound.
Oh, wow.
ADT changed everything because it created a similar effect artificially.
So it wasn't just about saving time then. It actually changed the sound of music going forward.
Massively. ADT led to artificial chorusing, which is everywhere in music production these days. And then there's backward recording. They use that on guitar solos and even John's vocals in Rain, creating those totally otherworldly sounds that influenced countless artists after them.
Don't forget about varispeeding, changing the tape speed to manipulate the mood. That's what gives Rain that haunting, unsettling vibe and I'm only sleeping. That sort of dreamy, almost lazy feeling. Like if you imagine speeding up or slowing down a record while it was playing.
Exactly. Revolver was their playground. They were constantly pushing the boundaries of what you could do in the studio.
They were obsessed with the tiniest details too. I mean, even the way they recorded Ringo's drums was revolutionary, using close miking, placing the microphone super close to the drums instead of further away, and they dampened the bass drum with clothing to fine-tune the sound. It was so innovative that studios across America were reportedly tearing down their setups and rebuilding them just to try and get that same drum sound.
That's right. And with all of that sonic innovation, it's no wonder the songs on Revolver are so incredibly diverse. Each one is like a window into a different part of their creative exploration during this really transformative time for them.
Which leads us to the heart of it all, the music. Ready to dig into some of Revolver's most iconic tracks.
Absolutely. I think everyone listening is in for some serious aha moments as we break down how these songs came together and what makes them so special.
All right, let's start things off with Taxman, the album's opener. How often do you hear a Beatles song about taxes?
Right. Kind of strange, right? But it actually makes sense when you know the backstory. George Harrison, who wrote it, was apparently pretty annoyed by how high the tax rates were in Britain back then.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere that the top earners were getting hit with like a 95% tax rate. Man, I'd be writing protest songs too if I were them.
It wasn't just a personal thing for Harrison, though. Those super high taxes were part of this bigger anxiety going on in post-war Britain. Think about it. People had just come through a world war and things were changing so fast. And Taxman really captured that feeling of uncertainty, which is probably a big reason why it resonated with so many people.
And the irony of a Beatles singing about taxes is just brilliant. Okay, here's a bit of trivia for you. The guitar solo on Taxman isn't even George playing.
You're right. That screaming, feedback-drenched solo, it's actually Paul McCartney on lead guitar. Pretty unexpected, huh?
Total curveball. Really shows how much each Beatle was pushing their own musical limits on Revolver.
Okay, speaking of pushing limits, we gotta talk about Eleanor Rigby. Such a different feel from their usual love songs, right? It's dealing with these themes of loneliness and isolation stuff you didn't really hear in pop music back then.
Yeah, and the arrangement is even more striking. There's not a single Beatle playing an instrument on that track. It's just Paul's voice and this gorgeous string octet.
Which makes sense when you think about how into classical music Paul was getting at the time. He was really intrigued by the idea of smashing these different musical worlds together and seeing what
And
happened.
smashed them together they did.
Hmm.
Eleanor Rigby showed everyone that you didn't need a typical band setup to create something powerful. And its haunting, melancholic beauty is what makes it such a timeless classic.
Then you've got George Harrison's Love You Too, which is like his full-on embrace of Indian music. 100%. Love You Too wasn't just Harrison dipping his toes into Indian sounds. It was him diving in head first. He's got the sitar, the tabla, these traditional Indian instruments creating this mesmerizing, almost meditative mood. And remember, this was way before world music became popular, so a lot of people in 66 were hearing the sounds of India for the very first time because of this song.
It's incredible to think about how ahead of their time they were. It wasn't just the music itself. Love You Too sparked this wider interest in Indian culture and spirituality, too. Suddenly, you're hearing sitar music everywhere, and people are getting curious about meditation and Eastern philosophy. George Harrison, just by making this music, opened up this whole new world for people.
It's amazing how one song can do that. Okay, and we can't talk about groundbreaking without mentioning Tomorrow Never Knows, the last song on Revolver, and it's like a sonic trip, unlike anything anyone had heard before.
It's like stepping into a kaleidoscope.
Hmm.
You've got the tape loop swirling around, John's voice all distorted, and that drum beat just pulls you in its pure psychedelic exploration.
And the lyrics inspired by Timothy Leary's The Psychedelic Experience, they're all about emptying your mind, surrendering to the moment, which really resonated with the whole counterculture movement and the exploration of altered states of consciousness that was happening.
And musically, it was just as groundbreaking. The Beatles and the production team were playing with tape loops, backward recording, and manipulating tape speeds in ways nobody had even thought of before.
It's incredible when you think about it, too. They achieved all this with really limited technology. Today, we have computers and software for those effects, but they did it all manually with tape machines and sheer ingenuity.
It makes you appreciate their creativity even more. So, Revolver's release wasn't all smooth sailing, though, was it? I mean, our sources mentioned that John Lennon's "more popular than Jesus" comment caused quite a bit of controversy, especially in the U.S.
Yeah, that comment, even though it was taken out of context, really overshadowed the album's release, especially during their last tour. It shows how sometimes cultural and religious sensitivities can clash with artistic expression.
And then there was the whole Butcher cover for the Yesterday and Today album. The Beatles, even if they weren't trying to, really knew how to stir things up.
Definitely. That Butcher cover, with its images of them covered in meat and those dolls, it was supposed to be satirical, like a statement against the Vietnam War. But it was just too much for people back then. It's interesting how differently people interpret images depending on their culture.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, even with the controversy and the initial shock, Revolver still shot to the top of the charts.
It's true. It even outsold their own compilation album, a collection of Beatles oldies, and that was released around the same time.
People couldn't get enough of it.
It seems that way. But the impact of Revolver went way beyond just record sales. The Ladder.com article mentioned that it actually caused a dip in the American stock market.
Wait, seriously, how could an album have that much power?
Well, you see, after the whole more popular than Jesus thing blew up, there were these calls to boycott the Beatles. People were even burning their records. And all that backlash, it actually caused the stock price of Capitol Records to drop.
Capitol Records, that was the Beatles' American label, right?
Exactly.
Crazy. I mean, you don't think about music impacting Wall Street like that.
Huh?
Shows you how much influence the Beatles really had.
Totally. They weren't just a band, they were a cultural phenomenon. And Revolver was this big turning point for them. They were challenging people's expectations, starting debates, opening minds to all these new sounds and ideas.
Yeah. We've talked about how groundbreaking it was for its time, but what about its impact on other musicians?
Oh, huge. I mean, Revolver showed everyone what was possible in the studio. Suddenly, every musician wanted to experiment with tape loops and backward recording and all the crazy things the Beatles were doing.
It wasn't just the psychedelic stuff either, right?
Yeah.
Even the more melodic songs, the more introspective ones, those had a big impact too.
Right. Like Eleanor Rigby, here, there, and everywhere. Those songs prove that you could be experimental and innovative, but still create something beautiful and emotionally resonant. And then there's Gotta Get You Into My Life. Those Motown influences, that horn section, it's just pure joy. The
Yeah.
Beatles were masters at blending genres and making something totally unique.
And we can't forget Love You too.
Yeah.
That song really helped introduce a lot of people to world music. George's use of Indian instruments and scales was groundbreaking.
Totally. Revolver showed off how broad their musical vocabulary was. They were like these sponges soaking up inspiration from everywhere, classical music, Indian ragas, avant-garde stuff. And then they blended it all together to create something brand new.
But all that being said, it was a pretty radical change from their earlier sound. Was anyone confused by Revolver when it first came out? Like, were some fans just not ready for it?
There were definitely some mixed reactions. Some music critics and fans, they were used to the earlier stuff, the poppier Beatles.
Right. Yeah.
So when Revolver came out, it kind of threw them off. Some people even called it controversial.
But for the people who were ready for something different,
It was huge. Critics, musicians, especially the younger generation, they were blown away by it. It was just so daring, so original. It really opened up what people thought pop music could be.
so even though it might have confused some folks at first, Revolver ended up changing what pop music was allowed to be.
100%. It blew the old rules out of the water and set this new standard. For creative ambition, for sonic experimentation, it was a statement.
All that in just over 35 minutes. Not a very long album, but they fit so many ideas into it.
I know, every note feels important. But it's not just the music. Revolver's impact, it went beyond that. It even changed how people thought about albums as a format.
You mean how it shifted things from just a collection of singles to an album being more like a complete work of art?
Exactly. Revolver proved that an album could be this whole journey, a carefully thought out experience.
And then that led to concept albums like Skeet Peppers and everything that came after.
Totally. Revolver showed the world that an album could be art.
So we've got Revolver being this groundbreaking album musically, and then also this landmark moment for albums as a concept.
It's crazy. It broke all the rules while also setting the stage for a whole new era of music. It's really no surprise that people call it one of the greatest albums ever made.
And that debate is still going on. Remember that interesting fact from the Wikipedia article? It said that now a lot of critics actually think Revolver was even more groundbreaking than Sweet Pepper.
Yeah. And the more you dig into Revolver, the more you start to understand just how deep and innovative it was, how much it still influences music today. It's an album that people can keep coming back to.
It's like this living thing that keeps changing and evolving over time.
Absolutely. And for everyone listening, I know you all love the Beatles and their music, and that means there's always something new to discover with Revolver.
This deep dive has been incredible. It wasn't just about listening to the music. It was about understanding Revolver, the context, the making of it, and its impact.
Yeah. Hopefully we've given everyone listening some new things to think about.
Well said. I think Revolver reminds us that music isn't just entertainment. It can challenge us, inspire us, even change the world around us.
100%. And who knows, maybe listening to Revolver will inspire someone out there to go and create the next groundbreaking album.
I love that. And with that thought, we'll let you get back to listening. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone.